Okay, everyone see that? Okay, so about 3/4 of the way down, about 6 lines up from where it goes wide, 8 lines up from where it goes wide. We saw the Brisa says Stein Kihilchasan, that for the sukkah, for the kosher sukkah, you have to have 2 full walls, meaning at least 7 tefachim wide each, and the third wall of a tefach. Yeah, so even the smallest amount, about 8 centimeters, if that. Yes, having said that, says the Gemara, Amar Rava, and in fact it's Rava. You'll see, if you see in the Gosabach, the Aleph there changes it to Rava. Yeah, often you see throughout Shas, Rava and Rava are interchanged, obviously because one ends in an Aleph, one's in a Hay, so it's easy to mix them up. So Amar Rava, so Rava said, V'chein l'Shabbos. So says Rava, that just as you only need 2 walls and a tefach for a kosher sukkah, for it's considered to be a sukkah, then so too on Shabbos. Let's look at Rashi, because it's very important to understand what it means here. It's the first wide line in the Rashi here, where the cursor is. V'chein l'Shabbos. What does it mean? And so too for Shabbos. Says Rashi, Afal b'desarch l'Shabbos shlosh v'chitzos le'asos reshus hayachid. Even though in Hilchos Shabbos we need 3 full walls for it is considered to be a reshus hayachid, a private domain. In the din of Eruvin, Hilchos Shabbos, we learn that the definition of a reshus hayachid is something enclosed at least on 3 sides. If it's not enclosed on 3 sides, then it's automatically considered to be a reshus harabim, a public domain. Okay, so in the din of Shabbos, we say you have to have 3 walls for it to be a reshus hayachid. Middle of the first line, Shabbos shel sukkos muter lismoch al mechitzos al sukkah. Says Rashi, what did Rava mean? It makes a chiddush, he said. So normally throughout the year on the regular Shabbos, for something to be considered to be a reshus hayachid, it has to have 3 walls. But on the Shabbos of Sukkos, we can rely on the rule of 2 walls and a bit. Only one Shabbos in the year. Im asab reshus harabim, look, the end of the line of the Rashi. Im asab reshus harabim. So if you build your sukkah in the street, close to your house, your house, and you built your sukkah close to the house, but you've only got 2 full walls and the third wall, which is even a tefach. You can go in and out from your house to your sukkah because they're both considered to be a reshus hayachid.
Assuming one of the walls of the sukkah is the wall of the house.
Yes, yeah.
Because if it's in the street, as you say, it could be independently in the yard somewhere, and that you wouldn't be allowed to carry, would you?
100%. That's a good point, John. Yeah. What we're saying is you're not traversing, you're not going out of your house into the street and then into your sukkah.
Unless you make another eruv, I suppose you could do that.
Right. But here the chiddush is, even if you've only got 2 walls and a bit of a sukkah adjacent to your house, abutting your house, but the sukkah is obviously external to the house and therefore technically in the reshus harabim, in the street. Since it's considered to be a kosher sukkah, since the walls are considered to be kosher al pi sukkah, then therefore on the Shabbos of sukkahs we'd also consider it to be a kosher sukkah. It's amazing chiddush if you think about it. All other Shabbos of the year, if you were to step out your house into a structure like that, a 2-walled and a bit structure, you could not carry from your house into it. The only time you could do it is on Shabbos of Sukkot. Let's carry on in the Rashi. Towards the end of the second line. And as I said, even though the rest of the Shabbos of the year, that wouldn't be permissible, you couldn't go out of your house into such a structure. Or also any other, I'm not saying like a sukkah, but any other time of the year, if you were to build such a structure in the street, you couldn't enter it or exit it or carry in it on Shabbos. It wouldn't be permitted. V'hachi l'Shabbos the Sukkah Sharia. However, on this Shabbos of Sukkot, it is permitted. Why? As we'll see in the Gemara, but we'll see it in Rashi anyway. Since the third wall is a tefach, Agmiri Rachmana leMoshe. Very interesting, says Rashi. This is the halacha leMoshe Messina that we learned. Yeah, remember, based on how the Torah was written, how the word Sukkos was written. Halacha leMoshe Messina teaches us that for Sukkos, a third wall is considered a wall, even if it's merely a tefach. Mechitza Sukkah to lahave ledofen shleima. That they don't need according to the halacha Moshe Sinai, this third wall of a tefach is considered to be a complete wall of the sukkah.
So in a way, there's a leniency on the case of Sukkot for the sake of the benefit of having a sukkah. Because the Torah is allowing us, or the Gemara is allowing us to put up a sukkah with this minimum sort of structure. So because that's allowed, then Shabbat becomes it's automatically lenient though, isn't it? Just for 1 week.
Yeah, that's what it's amazing. Chiddush from Rabbah. It's a novel idea to suggest, and it's all based on this principle of migoi. And we'll come back. We'll see it in the Gemara in a moment. Let me just finish that Rashi. So Rashi says,
sorry.
That's right. Let me say the sukkah. Have a dofen nami b'Shabbat. So since says right, what's the mechanism here? Since the third wall is considered to be a complete wall in relation to the sukkah, then on the Shabbos of Sukkot, so not having dofen nami b'Shabbos to sukkah inyan Shabbos, and therefore on the Shabbos of Sukkot, this wall is also considered to be a full wall in relation to the laws of Shabbos, meaning that normally on the first Shabbos to be able to carry in a structure. But in order for a structure to be considered a reshus hayochid, it has to have 3 walls. See, even though technically it doesn't have 3 walls, but because for the sake of Sukkot, it's considered to be 3 full walls. So on the Shabbos of Sukkot, it's considered to be 3 full walls, and therefore you can carry in it on the Shabbos of Sukkot. Let's see it now in the Gemara. So Amar Rabba v'chein Shabbos. So Rabba says, and that's what he meant by that. When he says also for Shabbos, it doesn't mean for every single Shabbos. He means purely and simply for the Shabbos of Sukkot. And it says, why is that case? It says the Gemara. It says this is Rabba's logic. Migo to have a dofen inyan sukkah. Since this third wall of a tefach is considered to be a full wall in relation to Sukkot, have a dofen inyan Shabbos. So too is considered to be a full third wall in relation to the Shabbos of Sukkot. Now again, look in the Rashi of the 4th line of Rashi, the wide lines. It's just it's right at the just bottom there in the middle of the page. So Dofin HaSukkah Kedofin Shabbos. Let me just check that's going on what bit we've done. Yeah, says Rashi, Dofin Sukkah Kedofin Shabbos. So the walls for Sukkahs are considered to be the walls for Shabbos as well as Sukkahs. Called Sidde Defano Shehetiru Chachamim LeShabbos. All aspects of walls, meaning the halachas related to walls, the Chachamim allowed, permitted for Shabbos, Kagoin Mechitza Shel Shesi V'lo Erev. So, for example, now here we're going to see Halichos Erubin for Shabbos. Rashi is going to tell us the rabbis also. So, when we say 3 walls for Shabbos, so for something to be considered to be a Rosh Hashanah Yachid on Shabbos, it has to have 3 walls. We don't literally mean 3 full, complete walls. So, for example, they would allow you to have Shesi V'erev. Literally means crisscross. That's how we normally translate crisscross. So things intercrossing with each other, right? Shesi V'lo Erev would mean vertical without the horizontal. So, for example, he says, because the Amar Be'eruvin, if Gemara Eruvin says in Taf Zayin on the base, after the brackets, it's still in Rashi here, Makifin bekanim ubilvad shlo yehi ben kana lechaveru shlosh tefakim. So what you could do is, to build a wall for Shabbos, you could put up a plank of wood, even the thinnest plank of wood, upright, and then leave a gap, as long as the gap is less than 3 tefachim, and then you put another and another and another, at least as long as there's less than 3 tefachim between all of these planks, then what happens? Let's Rashi. So you have these planks, these boards, upright boards, as long as there's less than 3 tefachim between each of them. And even if the width of the plank is only the width of a finger, so it's very thin. And there's between each of these boards 3 tefachim, but a little bit less than 3. And when it comes to sukkah, the gaps are more than the uprights, it's permissible. Why? And lovud, because we say lovud, that they extend to each other. The 3 tefachim, the less than the 3 tefachim gap is almost is considered to be insignificant. It's as if there's no gap between them. That gap is a notional gap, and we close it up. And therefore, the uprights are greater than the airspace. We mentioned this a little bit last time. As we're going to see on Shabbos, we are a bit more stringent. We say that the solid amount of wall has to be greater than any open area. So if you've got 3 walls, even if constructed in this way, where there's gaps between them of less than 3 tefachim, that will, as long as that is greater than the actual wide open space of the 4th wall missing, then you're fine. Absolutely fine for mechitzas on Shabbos. That's one way of looking at it. Ta'amim and lavud. V'haveilei kuloi omed, and it's considered that it's completely enclosed on 3 sides. Rashi goes on here. That's one way of looking at it. One option. Oi shel erev below shesi. Or for example, you've got horizontal straps going round without the verticals. Because Snan Hasam is also taught in Eruvin. Makifin shlosha chavalim. You take 3 ropes and you string them around poles. So, for example, let's say you've got a pole at each of the 4 corners, and you string you string rope all the way around these poles. Having makif namina dofin sukkah is also considered to be an encircled by walls. And again, as long as you make sure there's less than 3 tefachim between the ropes. So think of a boxing ring. Yeah, I don't know what the gaps are between. I don't know what the rules say. What's it called? The boxing rules say about the gaps between the ropes. I'm sure there's also a regulation height between them. But think about that. So they're going all the way around the outside of the ring. I don't have maybe let's say there are 3 of them. As long as there's less than 3 tefachim, that would be considered to be totally enclosed. Says Rashi. As long as you make sure there's no more than 3 tefachim between them, because you mark it when it goes around. Because again, we say about Shabbos that would work for Shabbos as well, because of the law of lovud. We close up the gaps. But as long as you've got them in many places, because then you would have, as long as you don't have many entrances in many different places, because then the air space will be greater than the closed up space. So even within that, you could actually have breaks in the rope that can be considered to be entrances. Just as solid, just as you think about it, solid walls of a house. There are breaks in the solid material for windows and doors. Now that doesn't take away from the consideration of walls. So too here, as long as you've got, even with those entrances, 1 or 2, as long as the closed area is greater than the open area, you're fine in relation to mechitzas for Shabbos. So the same thing would apply for the sukkah and for the Shabbos of sukkah. Yeah. So it's a logical explanation. So let's go back in the Gemara. So we're here. Migota have a dofen le'inyan sukkah, have a dofen le'inyan Shabbos. Okay? Any problem? No problems with that, right? Says the Gemara, Esvei Abaya. So Abaya raises an objection. And he says, Umi Amrinan Migoi. But can we really say Migoi? Can we really say that this idea of since it's okay for Hilchus Mechitzas for Sukkos, is okay also for Hilchus Mechitzas of Shabbos Sukkos? How can we really compare them? And why does he ask that question? For Hatanya, surely we've learned in the Brisa, yeah? Dofen Sukkah Kedofen Shabbos. So the walls of a sukkah are like the walls of Shabbos enclosures. Ubilvad shelo yehi ben kana lechaveru shlosh tefachim. And as long as there's not 3 tefachim between each of the boards, exactly what we've said up to now. However, v'yesera Shabbos al sukkah. However, Shabbos is more, in addition, meaning it's more machmir, it's more stringent. Shabbos is more stringent than Sukkos. Shah Shabbos einen niteres ela ba'omed meruba ala poretz. The difference is that when it comes to the walls for Shabbos, when we say that you can have 3 walls and it's considered to be a Rishus HaYachid for Shabbos, and you can have it either vertical poles with less than 3 tefachim gaps between them, or horizontal ropes as long as there's 3 tefachim with them, and you can have some entrances in it. That's only if the total enclosed space is greater than any total openings. Yeah, which we don't say about Shabbos, which we don't say about Sukkot. The walls of a sukkah can have, as we know, that what is it about? We say that for a kosher sukkah, if you've got 1, 2, and a bit walls, and the rest is completely open, and even if there are gaps between the walls, openings in that, even if the open space is greater than the closed space, it's still a kosher sukkah. Because as long as you've got 2 full walls, even if they've got breaks in them, plus the 3rd wall, even if it's a tefach, and add up with the rest of that open space of the 4th wall and the rest of the 3rd wall, nevertheless, it's still good as a sukkah. So you see, we can't. What Abai is saying is, how can you compare Shabbos of Sukkos to Sukkos? Do you understand Abai's point, his objection? That there's a fundamental difference in the way we approach the definition of walls for Shabbos and the walls for Sukkos. Walls for Shabbos, yes, you're right. We can rely on Novod. We can rely on less than 3 tefachim. However, that's as long as the total enclosed area is greater than the total open area.
Where is that specified?
Sorry, 1 second, Johnny. 1 second. Whereas on Sukkos, we're not bothered. As long as you've got 2 full walls and a tefach, even if the remainder open space and the gaps in those 2 and a bit walls add up to more than the closed space, we say as long as you've got 2 and a bit walls, you're good to go. You're fine. Sorry, so Johnny, where's it?
So in other words, you're saying under 50% of wall is okay, total. Under 50%.
For what?
For Sukkot.
Yes. Yeah, enclosed space, yeah.
In the text tonight, you've said that implies it's okay for Shabbat Sukkot.
Rabbi made that assertion, yes?
Yes.
Rabbi said since. He said since that's okay for Sukkos, it's okay for Shabbos or Sukkos. Abai comes along and says, hold on a second, how can you say since it's okay for Sukkos, it's okay for Shabbos Sukkos? Because you can't compare them. Because the leniency, or not, so the Sukkos is much more lenient than Shabbos. Because we've seen that we've derived that Sukkos you only need 2 and a bit walls. And it doesn't matter if the then combined airspace, the lack of walls, is greater. Whereas on Shabbos, when we say you need 3 walls, that's plus, that there has to be 3 walls, however they're constructed, even if they've got little gaps in them, but they must also be, the walls area must be greater than the open area. So you can't compare the 2. You can't.
That's for the rest of the year, not talking about Shabbat. That's the rest of the year. The
rest of the year, yeah. A mechiza, yes. But when we're trying to say, well, what do we do about Shabbos Sukkos? The Bible says, well, you can't then say on Shabbos Sukkos, hold on a second, we'll do away with that requirement of Omed Meruba ala Parutz, that there needs to be the walls area needs to be greater than the open area. We can't just do away with it and say, oh, it's fine on Shabbos and Sukkot, because Sukkot you can have it's also only 2.5 walls, but those 2.5 walls, the walled area can be less than the open area. It probably will be less than the open area, especially in some of the constructions we have. So Abai is raising a fundamental objection to Rabbah. Okay, he said you can't employ this idea of migoy in this circumstance. Let's look at Rashi. Rashi is here, but Shah Shabbos in the middle of the line here. Can you see where I'm moving the cursor? Here. Shah Shabbos Einu Niteres, because walls on Shabbos are only permitted when you've got Omed Meruba ala Parut, where the closed area is greater than the open area. Im yesh, says Rashi, im yesh ba pesachim harbe. If there are many entrances in those walls, she'ein bahem tsuras haPesach, that don't have the frame going over the top of it to make it notionally closed, for Rabim ala Omed Mbatle Leila Omed, and they create a greater airspace than the closed area, then it negates the closed area, and it's not considered to be enclosed, and it's no good for Shabbos. Okay, says Gemara, Masha'ein Kain the Sukkah, which is not the case with Sukkahs. Look at Rashi here, Masha'ein Kain. Masha'ein Kain b'Sukkah, the Sagi lei b'Stein Kehilchasan v'Shlish Savi l'Tevach. Because on Sukkahs we said that if we consider to be a kosher Sukkah, 2 full walls, and 1, even if it's a tefach, is sufficient. And even if there are openings on these 2 full walls, echad or shnayim, 1 or 2, they join up haparotzos with these openings. So even if, says Rashi, when it comes to a sukkah, you've got on your 2 full walls, you've got very large open entrances, which would mean that taking those entrances plus the 4th non-existent wall and the rest of the non-existent 3rd wall, you've got far more open space than you have closed space. We'd say that's absolutely fine. As long as you've got 2 full walls, even with gaps in them, with a tefach 3rd wall, you're absolutely fine. So you see, what Abai's point is, it's a very good point. You can't compare. You can't start employing migoy. Since it's okay for sukkahs, it's okay for Shabbos or sukkahs. Because we see there's definitely a sad chamur when it comes to Shabbos. Far more stringent in relation to our definition of walls, of enclosed areas for Shabbos than it is for sukkahs. Now let's go back in the Gemara, and Abai now completes his challenge of Rabbah. He says, my love. So my love, is it not then? Let me just see if I find my Gemara. My love, Yisera Shabbos to Sukkah, Sukkah, but I'm in a migoy. Is it not, therefore? It's a rhetorical question. He's saying it is. That Shabbos of Sukkot is more stringent than Sukkot itself in relation to the walls, and therefore you can't say migoy. Yeah. So because Shabbos is normally more stringent in relation to how you define walls, the Shabbos of Sukkot is also going to be more stringent, and you can't say, oh, if it's good for the other 6 days of Sukkot, then it's okay for the Shabbos of Sukkot. You just can't say that. So it says, what do you think Rabbah's going to answer? Take a guess.
That the same rule must apply for either side.
Yeah, he's going to disagree, right? He's going to say, no, it's fine. He'll say no. Look, he says here, Lloyd. I says no. That's not the case. The way Rabbah answers it is this. He says, Yisera Shabbos to Alma, al Shabbos to Sukkah. He said, the truth is this. No, Abai, you're trying to suggest that the Shabbos of Sukkot is stricter than the other days of Sukkot. Says Rabbah, no. A regular Shabbos is more stringent than the Shabbos of Sukkot. You understand what he's saying here? Yeah, you're right. On all the other Shabbos of the year, we have to have Omed Meruba ala Parutz. The enclosed area has to be greater than the open area. But on the Shabbos of Sukkot, we can be more lenient, and we can say we'll accept an enclosure where the open area is greater than the closed area. So someone's got some background noise.
Rabbi.
Paul. Thank you. Yeah.
Rabbi.
Hello.
Does the Shabbat of Sukkah have all the rules of normal Sukkah plus more stringent rules?
In what type of way?
Like just generally, does the Shabbat of Sukkah have all the normal rules of Sukkah plus the more stringent ones that we're looking at?
So according to Rabba, no. He would say, actually, the Shabbos of Sukkot is more lenient than a regular Shabbos. On a regular Shabbos the rest of the year, for you to be able to carry in Rosh Hashanah Yachid, it has to have 3 proper walls, where Omed Meruba ala Parutz, where the enclosed area is greater than the open area. However, says Rabba, on the Shabbos of Sukkot, we can be more lenient, and we can say, since the definition of an enclosed area of a sukkah is 2 walls and a bit, even if the open area is greater than the closed area, Parutz Meruba ala Omed, the other way around. Therefore, on the Shabbos of Sukkot, the Shabbos of Sukkot is more lenient than all other Shabbos the rest of the year. That makes sense?
Yes, that does. Thank you.
A good question. Okay, so that's how now Rabba rebuts what Abai tried to say. Let's look at Rashi, how Rashi explains it. Just with one word, loy. Loy. Here we go. Here in the middle of the line. Here says Rashi, loy. So Rabba said, no, that's not right. That's not right. Shabbos of Sukkot is not more stringent than Sukkot itself. Loy. Hakikama, this is what really we meant to say. Yisera hilchos tiltul Shabbos to Alma, hilchos tiltul Shabbos to Sukkah. What we really mean is the laws in relation to moving things between a Rosh Hashanah and a Rosh Hashanah are more stringent on a regular Shabbos throughout the year than they are on the Shabbos of Sukkot. So Shabbos to Alma, because on a regular Shabbos throughout the year, it's only permitted to carry in an area where the closed area is greater than the open area. To we don't say migoy, since it's okay for one, it's okay for another. For Shabbos to Sukkah, niteres mishum migoy. However, so we can't derive what she's telling you here is the Rabbi would say, I agree. You can't extend the leniency of Sukkot to all other Shabbos in the year and say it's okay to carry in an area that's surrounded by 3 walls, but where the airspace is greater than the closed area. But you can use migoy in relation to one Shabbos in the year, and that's the Shabbos of Sukkot, because that Shabbos is more lenient than all other Shabbos in the year, where you can carry in an enclosed area where the enclosed area is less than the open area. Jonathan.
Right, is there any thinking as to why there will be more leniency? So I understand there's debate about it's lenient, but is it because of A or B? But to me, the nub of this would be, why should the rules of Shabbat be more lenient on Sukkot than the rest of the year? I mean, that to me is the bit that...
Very good question. It's a very good question. And you have to ask Rabba, how can you suggest that? As I said, it's a very big chiddush. It's a very big novel suggestion to say, there's one Shabbos in the year and we're more lenient than any other Shabbos. It's a great quiz question, yeah? If you ever go to a shul quiz and they answer that question, I'll be impressed by the shul. Yeah. It's a good question. I think, look, what Rabbi is trying to say is this, almost like if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, right? I think the point is this, that if we're willing to say that a sukkah is kosher, meaning that the 3 walls that we derived that you need, we agreed, we derived, halacha l'Moshe Sinai, you need 3, we derived from the Torah itself that you need 3 walls. Remember, it's going through basukos, the number of times the word sukkah is mentioned. Yeah. We then said, Halakha Moshe Sinai kicks in and tells us when we say 3 walls, we actually mean 2 full walls and a bit.
Yeah.
Right. That's good. You've got now a kosher sukkah. So my question would be to you is this, putting it the other way around almost. If we're saying for 6 days of sukkahs, that's a kosher sukkah, how can you then, in good faith, say, oh, but there's 1 day of sukkahs when that's no good?
Yeah.
And that's
I guess my view is then if the definition of walls is good enough for Shabbat on Sukkot, it should be good enough for Shabbat the rest of the year.
Okay.
That's the so.
Yeah,
so
and I think that's the point. Yeah, and I think that's the point Abai is trying to make. That he's saying is that by saying migoy, by saying since it's good enough for the goose, meaning sukkahs, it's good enough for the gander or Shabbos. Abai comes and says, no, that you've misunderstood me. What I meant to say was, no, I agree with you. You can't derive from sukkahs to Shabbos throughout the year. I agree with you on that because there's a special stringency on Shabbos when it comes to mechitzas, which is omed meruba ala parut, that the enclosed space has to be greater than the open area. But it's illogical to say that on Shabbos of Sukkot. Because if it's good enough for the 6 days of Sukkot, it's got to be good for the 7th day as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So look, there are 2 ways of looking at it. There are totally 2 ways of looking at it. That's the Gemara's job to find what is the most robust way of looking at it, and not to give the game away. Spoiler alert. If you look here, hanging Daled here, that's the key. That's the sign of who we go according to. That's how that will take us up to here. Remember, I've shown you before. I'll show you again. That Daled tells us over here. Yeah, can you see here? So this is the Ein Mishpat. This is the references to halacha. So it says Maimonides Sham Hilcha Halacha Tes, which is mine, it's easy to see, and Tur Sham also in the Tur, which is the forerunner of Shulchan. So that's how we paskin. We paskin like Rabba. Yeah, we follow Rabba's logic that 1 Shabbos in the year, we are slightly more relaxed on the rules of Shabbos. Now remember, actually, let me make it sound a bit better. It might make it easier to swallow. Remember the stringency of Shabbos throughout the year of needing omed merubal parut, that the enclosed area has to be greater than the open area, is a rabbinic requirement.
Okay.
On the level of Torah law, as we'll see, maybe we'll get to it tonight. On the level of Torah law, as long as you've got some form of mechitzas, it's good. The rabbis came along and said, look, we don't want people taking liberties. We need to somehow have it that it's clear that these are enclosed spaces, not open areas. For example, if we go back here, we spoke about this right at the beginning. Do you remember this idea of the mavoi?
Yeah.
In Hilchos Shabbos, we have an idea of an alleyway leading off a chotzer. So you've got a number of houses, all like in a square. And then leading off the square is an alleyway that leads you out into this is the street, okay? Now, al pi Torah, you can carry in this alleyway because it's an enclosed area on 2 sides, 3 sides maybe. This is closed off here, but it's open onto the street here. The rabbis were concerned. They said because it leads you out into the street and it looks like the street in some way, it's going to open straight out onto the street. We're worried if we allow you to carry in here without any sort of reminder that this is getting to the limits of the Rishus HaYachid, you may then come to carry out here, which is a big problem. So what do they say? We require you to put a lechi, to put a board, a beam of any thickness against the wall, as merely as a symbol, as a sign, as a reminder, almost like like a triangle saying Rishus HaRabim this way. Like warning, a warning sign. That's all it is. But that's a rabbinic requirement. Al pi Torah, nothing wrong with carrying in here. So similarly, you don't need 3 full walls for it to be a mechitza of Shabbos. the rabbis required it to be of a certain consistency is the wrong word, but a certain amount of, what word we use? Substantial enough that it's recognizable as walls. But along comes Rabbi and says, you know what? Yeah, I agree. For the rest of the year, we need that stringency, but it's a stringency. When it comes to Shabbos and Sukkot, there's a good reason to say, actually, we can be a bit more lenient, because if it's good enough for 6 days of Sukkot, it should be good enough for the 7th day as well. Okay? It's a really interesting question.
But excuse me interrupting again. You're only talking about the leniency of this sort of 2.5 wall arrangement for the point of view of putting up a sukkah. It's not to do with carrying during the week, is it? There's no issue of carrying.
No.
So why should? So you're talking about what is the property that is similar, that is required which is required for Shabbat to be conserved inside the sukkah. It's an eruv. You've declared it as an eruv, basically, haven't you, for Shabbat?
No, because we haven't talked about. No, we're talking about being Marisha Yachid, a private domain on Shabbat.
Oh, I see.
Well,
so it's the status as a private domain then.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, obviously, we know you can carry in a private domain, but the private domain has to be defined. We've said, according to the halachas of Shabbos are, for something to be a private domain, it has to have a minimum of 3 walls.
And is that definition what is required for the rest of the days of Sukkot? A private domain. Is that what we're saying as? What are the two things in common? What's that? Let's say the highest common factor between the two. How do we know that we're talking about the same thing? Like we're talking about apples and pears.
Right, you're right. So for the rest of Sukkot, we're not really concerned about tiltul. On Yom Tov,
right.
on Yom Tov and on Holomoh, there's no issue.
Private domain, no.
No. We're concerned about, do we have what's defined as a sukkah? Do we have enough mechitzas?
Right. So, what is a sukkah? A place to live in, or does it have to be private? That's the question.
It doesn't have to be private. It just needs to be something that's got 2 and a bit mechitzas.
So the question about Shabbat is irrelevant then. We're not talking about the set like for like, are we?
Well, no, it's not, because if our question is this. For sukkahs, we said you have to have a certain number of mechitzas for it to be a kosher sukkah, for eating and sleeping and etc. in it, right?
Yes.
We've been spending a long time defining what are the definitions of mechitzas, and we've established that it is 2 full walls and the third one of a tefah. Yeah.
Right.
So we've said 3 walls. The way we define 3 walls as 2 full ones and a tefah. Yeah?
Yes.
So that's how we define walls al pi sukkahs. So we're now, Rabbi Long comes and says, well, if it's good enough for sukkahs, it's good enough for Shabbos. Shabbos, we say, you need 3 walls. Well, the definition of 3 walls is, according to the halachas of sukkahs, 2 full ones and a bit.
Yes, but what my question is, you're defining it for a different purpose. For Sukkot, you're defining the 3 walls for a place to live in or to dwell in.
I think it's irrelevant. What's relevant is how do you define walls? Okay. For sukkahs you need. For sukkahs you need 3 walls, and we say that means 2 and a bit. For Shabbos we say you need 3 walls. Now we're saying, well, if 2 and a bit is good enough for sukkahs, let it be good enough for Shabbos.
So just the status of defining the walls.
The walls, yes.
So we have in common. I'm looking for a common denominator here.
It's the definition of walls.
If it was good enough for Sukkot but not good enough for Shabbat, then on Shabbat of Sukkot you couldn't take your book with you into the Sukkah. Anything you would need for Shabbat would have to be in the Sukkah prior to Shabbat, and you would have to stay there till after Shabbat.
Right, and you couldn't bring food, and you can't move it, and you wouldn't be able to pick something up in the Sukkah and move it to the other side of the Sukkah, even that. But you're right, you couldn't move it between the house and the Sukkah 100%, because it'd be like moving it from the house into the street. No good. Yeah. So whatever you're going to be doing in there, for Shabbos it's sort of tilted of moving things. But what we're saying, the common denominator is that's what Rav was saying. He's saying if it's good enough for Sukkot as walls, then it should be good enough for Shabbos as walls on Shabbos and Sukkot. The rest of the year, I agree not. Abaye saying, hold on a second, you can't say that because there's a fundamental leniency when it comes to sukkahs, and there's a fundamental inherent stringency when it comes to Shabbos, and therefore you can't compare the two. That's the crux of their disagreement. Okay, should we carry on a little bit more? So obviously we're not. Abaye is also not going to just lie down and say, okay, you win. So Rabbah says, "Loi Yisera Shabbos to Sukkah Sukkah v'lo Amin." Sorry, Loi Yisera Shabbos to Alma al Shabbos to Sukkah. So first of the wide lines of the Gemara. No, Shabbos, a regular Shabbos, is more stringent than the Shabbos of Sukkot, but the Shabbos of Sukkot is not more stringent than the other days of Sukkot. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, listening nami Yisera Sukkah to Alma. The Shabbos. Let's then say, that's the case, that let's also say that a regular Sukkos is more stringent than the Sukkos of Shabbos. De'ilu Sukkah to Alma by Tefach Zochek, because with a regular Sukkah, we say that you require there to be, you'll say that you require there to be an extended tefach. When we talked about this last time, a bit more than a tefach. V'ilu sukkah the Shabbos lo by tefach sokek, whereas the sukkah on Shabbos doesn't require there to be an extended tefach. The sage belechi, and it's enough just to have a lechi, just to have one thin post. Why? To ha'at. Because you, Rabbi, yourself will say, and we'll see it hopefully on the top of the next Amud, you yourself will say that when it comes to Shabbos, that all you need is two walls and a lechi, a mavoi. If you have, go back to our picture up here, if you had this, two walls like this, in Rosh Hashanah, with a lechi, with just a little strip of wood against one of those walls, then you're perfectly happy people to carry in it. And that is less stringent than sukkahs. Because sukkahs, we say, if you've got this type of this construction, you need at least a tefach sochek, and some would say, I think it was Rav Shimon who said, you needed the kind of arba, you needed four and a bit. So actually, according to your arguments, actually you're contradicting yourself, because it turns out that sukkahs, the regular days of sukkahs, are more stringent than the Shabbos of sukkahs. And that really doesn't make any sense. Do you understand the point? Yeah?
Yes.
Look at Rashi. May explain it better than I will, of course. Where are we? Here, at the beginning of this line, about 6 lines up from the bottom, one word in, it says Shabbos and 2 dots. V'ilu sukkah the Shabbos, im asui k'mavoi shtei defonoseha zeh k'negezu. If you make the sukkah like an alleyway with open one end, one opposite the other, sagele belechi zakuf et selayotse, and we say it's enough to put up a lechi, a post, opposite or next to one of the entrances. Afal gav deinu chavoy tefach, even though this lechi isn't the width of a tefach even. Demigo deharvei dofen, the Shabbos, and now we're doing the other way around, because since that's considered to be a wall for Shabbos, havei nami dofen the sukkah, then let's say it's also a wall for sukkahs. Deha ma mishum deisle migoy. Since you've used the principle of migoy, amahachi say here the didach according to you, to amrit lechi mishum mechitza. You yourself have said that a lechi is considered to be a wall. And one who throws from there into the Rosh Hashanah, when it's got a lechi, will be chayav for throwing from a Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Meaning you define this lechi now. Sorry, you define this mavoi with a lechi as a Rosh Hashanah, which would mean you couldn't throw from it into the street. Therefore, we find that now, on a Torah level, it's considered to be a wall. And inside of that, and then within those that mavoi, that alleyway, it's a rishus hayachid. Nehida rabbanon asu midoraisa. Whereas now you'd say it's no good. You would say it's no good when it comes to sukkahs because you require there to be a tefach. You can't have it both ways. Because why? What we will say, let's go back in the Gemara. Yeah, because as we'll see on the top of the next Amud, you, Rabbi, will say, Sikech al gabe mavui, shleish lo lechi kasher. You will say that if you put schach on the top of an alleyway that has a lechi, has a board at one entrance of it, a thin board, not even a tefach, then it's kosher. It's a kosher sukkah. And yet, you've accepted, you yourself have said, that since the definition of walls of a sukkah are 2 and a bit, meaning at least a tefach, you're making a regular sukkah of the weekday more stringent than the sukkah of Shabbos. And that doesn't make any sense. Says the Gemara, so says Rabbah, penultimate line, middle of the line. Hahu lo itzruchalei, hashtem mekilta lechamirta amina. No, he says, that's not the case. I needed to teach what I needed to teach because I've gone from a more lenient thing to a more stringent thing. Meaning, I'm trying to learn from Sukkah to Shabbos. Sukkah is far less, is more lenient than Shabbos. Yeah, the problem of carrying on Shabbos is stringent. Look at Rashi, the bottom, penultimate line of Rashi. Ahu lo etzrichalei v'ashmi'inan diyaseira sukkah the alma sukkah de Shabbos. To say that the regular sukkah is more stringent than sukkah of Shabbos, so assume the mereisha shami'inan lei, as we right from the beginning. So hashta mekilta lechamirta amamigoi, because we've learned from something more lenient to something more stringent. Migoi dahavi dofen the sukkah to killer. We said since it's okay, two walls and a bit are okay for a sukkah, since that's okay, and that's more lenient than Shabbos, have dofen the Shabbos to chamira. We can also say that it's okay for a wall for walls on Shabbos. We've gone from something which is less stringent, something which is more stringent. That's a bigger chiddush. And the Gemara ends often saying, Machmirta lekilta lo kol shekain. To go from something more stringent to something more lenient, how much more so? That's far easier to go from something stringent. So if X is okay in one situation, then how much more so will it be okay in another situation which is more lenient? Yeah, look at Rashi. The mavo sheyesh lo lechi zakav dekashel and sukkah b'Shabbos. But if a lechi is okay to turn a mavoi into a rishus hayachid, then of course it's only going to be okay to turn a sukkah into a sukkah. Yeah?
Right.
I didn't need to teach that, says Rabbah. I didn't need to say that. Yes, you're right. Migoi can go both ways. But what I'm trying to teach you is something which although logical, is a far greater chiddush than by going from something lenient to something more stringent than it is going the other way around. Okay, so it's not a contradiction. Okay, that all makes sense? Okay, so we said that Rabbah is about to tell us something about a mavoi, about enclosing spaces. It says the Gemara, Gufa. So the main thing that was mentioned, Alma Rabbah, again it's Rabbah again, turn over. Yeah. Says the Gemara, coming up, Sikek al gabe mavoi, shleisho lechi keshera. We just saw this already. Says Rab. Yeah. Says the Brisa, if you put schach on top of a mavoi that has a lechi, has this plank at the entrance, then it's kosher. V'amar Rabba, and Rabba comes along and adds that and says, Siket al gabe pise birios kashera, and putting schach on top of planks over a well is also kosher. Now, what's this all about? Look at Rashi on the left-hand side. Let's look at the illustration first, and then read Rashi. So it's been outside. What's going on here? Also, halacha in Hilchos Eruv, and I think we referenced this once before, but we'll go over again. You've got here a well in the middle of an open space, right? In the middle of nowhere, there's a well. Now, the well itself is an enclosed area. To draw water out of the well into and pull it out on Shabbos out into an open space, you can't do, because that would be Hutzah. Yeah, you're taking from Rishus HaYachid into Rishus HaRabim. However, the rabbis made a leniency for those who are Ola L'Regel. People going up to Yerushalayim 3 times a year obviously need to stop for water. They need to stop on Shabbos. Now, how can they draw water on Shabbos? They can't pull water out of the well into the open area. So the rabbi said, you know what you can do? You can create a temporary enclosure by putting boards at 4 corners of the well at right angles to each other. Okay? Which notionally encloses the space. Encloses the space, closes up the space. Yeah? It turns it into a Rishus HaYachid. Let's look at Rashi. This is Rashi. Pisei Birios. So the boards over, the planks over a well, the Perek Sheni de Eruvin. So the second Perek of Eruvin, Daf Yud Zayin on the base. Tonight, it's taught in the Mishnah. Tehitiru Chachamim Mishum Ole L'Regalim. That the rabbis permitted those who were going up to Yerushalayim on Yontif, La'asos L'Birios, Shiburushus HaRabim, to make for these wells in the main open areas, Pasin Arba Komod Yumdim. 4 boards like right angles, Yumdim. V'roin ki'ilu yesh mechitza mizeh lezeh. And it was they could look at them as if they were walls facing each other. So each of them were like facing each other at 4 corners, closing up the notional spaces. The Nimsa Habor, 4th line of Rashi, Nimsa Habor Mukaf Mechitzas, and it was as if the well was encircled by walls. First of all, the narrow lines of Rashi, and therefore they've allowed them to draw water out of the well between the walls. If you were then to lay schach over the top of these diomdim, these right angles, it's kosher. B'Shabbos to Sukkos, on the Shabbos of Sukkos. Why? Says Rashi, Migu da have dofen the Shabbos, have dofen the Sukkah. Since they are good enough for walls of Shabbos, they're good enough for walls of Sukkah. V'afal gav de be'inen shtayim pilchasan. Even though, when it comes to Sukkos, we require you to have 2 walls and a bit, and here you don't, because you've only got these right angles at each corner. You don't have 2 full walls at all. You don't have 2 walls of 7 tefachim, and this bit is slightly misleading. I'm pointing out here. Yeah, the diagram is slightly misleading. Don't look at it as if we're looking at it face on. We're looking at it like we're looking down on it. So the aerial view, you're looking down, you can see the tops of the boards, right, by looking down on them. But they don't extend 7 tefachim outwards. And therefore, you haven't got 2 full walls at all. And yet, the rabbis made a special dispensation, and they said, on this, for Shabbos, it's good enough for Shabbos. They said, says Rabbah, it's good enough for Shabbos, since it's good enough for Shabbos, it's good enough for the Shabbos of Sukkot. Why? Because of Migoy. Even though normally the other days of Sukkot it wouldn't be good enough. So it wouldn't be good enough because you haven't got 2 walls and a bit. Here, if it's good enough for Shabbos, then it's good enough for the Sukkos of Shabbos, the Shabbos of Sukkos. Yeah.
So two quick questions. One, does that mean that any water drawn out had to be consumed within that rectangle?
Yeah, absolutely.
And secondly, that presumably that means that for the non-Shabbat days of Sukkot, you couldn't eat within that rectangle, but on Shabbat you could.
Sorry, say again?
So for the rest of Sukkot, it's not classified as a sukkah.
Yes.
But it's only a sukkah on Shabbat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've taken that, we've almost flipped the whole thing on its head now, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas we said before, we said that what Rabbi said previously of the Migoi was on Shabbos of Sukkot, a sukkah that only has 2 walls and a bit is good enough to eat in, to move around in and carry things in on the Shabbos of Sukkot, but for any other Shabbos, you couldn't carry in that. Here we're saying only on the Shabbos of Sukkot can you eat in that sukkah. The rest of sukkahs you wouldn't be able to. 100%. Yeah, very good. Okay, let's just carry on a little bit more. We'll just go down to those 2 dots, because now the question is, well, why did we teach this? Why did we teach the other thing? Why do we need to teach the 2 or 3 things that Rabbi taught us? Says the Gemara, utsricha, they're all necessary. Because if we only learnt about a mavoy, about the alleyway, the mavoy has got 2 proper walls. And therefore you might think, well, hold on, since it's got proper walls, the halacha is different. Whereas here, with the enclosure, where there aren't even 2 proper walls, we might say, no, you couldn't do that. Therefore, we need to teach both cases. You can't learn from the case of the alleyway to this case. Because you'll say, oh, in the case of the alleyway, there are 2 proper walls there anyway. So even just the lechi is okay. We're going to be lenient on that. But whereas here, there's not even 2 proper walls. Perhaps you can't eat in it. Nobody said you can. And what was it? Well, okay then. Well, let's just learn this case then of the enclosure, and you can learn from the enclosure to the mavoy. So says the Gemara, no, you can't do that either, because if you only learn the case of the passive areas, mishum deika shem above tefanos, they have the definition of 4 walls. Whereas if you put schach on the top of the mavoy, the 2 walls of the mavoy, which doesn't have 4 complete walls, or they're not called 4 complete walls, you might think, no, that's no good. Therefore, you need that one as well. And if you say, okay, we'll learn the 2 of these, and we can learn from more stringent to the less stringent. If you had these 2, you say, well, let's learn you can learn from the stringent to the lenient, but you can't learn from the lenient to the stringent. And therefore, you'd say, no, you can't. Meaning, you can't move around things in your sukkah on Shabbos when the sukkah is only made up of 2 walls and a tefach, sricha, and therefore that one's necessary as well. So each of them has a slightly leniency or slightly different aspect to it, which you wouldn't be able to derive one from the other, and therefore we need to be taught all 3 in order that we know that in all 3 cases, according to Rabbah, it will be permitted to use on the Shabbos of Sukkot. Okay, it says in the next time we'll see, we go back to the Mishnah, and the Mishnah said, we say one of the definitions of the sukkah, one of the psulim, one of the things which make a sukkah invalid is when the sun is greater than the shade. So Gemara is going to talk about exactly what that means, how we define that as well. Where does the shade have to come from? Can it come from the walls, or does it have to come from the schach, etc., etc.? So Shem, we'll see that next time. Okay, any questions on that?
It shows there are very, very different things we have to do for Shabbos, Shabbos Sukkah, and Sukkah. They're very different for all 3.
Yes, Yeah, they definitely are, and yet, I mean, it takes the genius of Rabbah to be able to say, actually, we can find some commonality between them, and say we can allow you to do something within them on the Shabbos of Sukkot, even though on aspect of it you wouldn't be able to do it on a regular Shabbos, and in another, as Jonathan quite rightly said, on this one you wouldn't be able to do it on the rest of Sukkot, but you could do it on the Shabbos of Sukkot. It's a paradox, but that's just the way it is. But because each one has a slight unique aspect to it, the Mavoi is unique because we allow you the two walls and a lechi, but because it's got two complete walls, whereas here they don't have complete walls, you might think no. Whereas, and then we're holding back. Why don't we learn from this to a Mavoi? Because we can't, because here it's defined as having 4 walls, whereas the Mavoi has only got 2. So you might think also no, and then we'll hold on. Well, let's take these 2 then, that and the Mavoi learn to the case of the Sukkah of Shabbos. We said no. That's because that's going from something which is more lenient to something which is more stringent. Therefore, we need all 3. Yeah, but once we've got, that's why all 3 of them teach something which we wouldn't have learned otherwise. Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Keep well.